Psalm 9 opens with a declaration of wholehearted praise. David speaks of giving thanks with his whole heart and telling of all God's marvelous works. True praise flows from a heart that has seen the faithfulness of God revealed in his covenant promises. The psalm does not present worship as an attempt to earn favor, but as the response of one who already knows the Lord's deliverance. Joy is found in God himself, not in human achievement, religious effort, or personal righteousness. Verses 3 to 6 describe enemies turning back and perishing before the presence of the Lord. The language points beyond earthly conflicts and reveals the certainty of divine judgment against all opposition to God's kingdom. Throughout Scripture, the enemies of God are not merely political nations, but all systems of unbelief and rebellion that resist his reign. The Lord is portrayed as the righteous judge who rebukes the nations and blots out the wicked forever. His judgment is final and irreversible. The psalm emphasizes that the throne of God is established in righteousness. Unlike earthly kingdoms that rise and fall, his reign is eternal. Human governments pass away, cities crumble, and proud empires disappear, but the Lord remains forever. This becomes especially significant in light of the fulfillment of God's covenant purposes through Christ, whose kingdom was established in power and cannot be shaken. Verses 7 to 10 present the Lord as a refuge for the oppressed. Those who know his name place their trust in him because he never forsakes his people. Confidence before God is not grounded in human worthiness, but in his unchanging character. The faithful rest in his covenant mercy. The Lord does not abandon those who seek him, because their acceptance rests upon his faithfulness rather than their performance. The psalm then calls Zion to proclaim the works of God among the people. The Lord remembers the afflicted and does not forget their cry. Divine remembrance in Scripture is covenant language. God acts on behalf of his people because he is faithful to his promises. He sees the suffering of the righteous and vindicates them in his appointed time. Verses 13-14 contain a plea for mercy and deliverance from death. David asks to be lifted up from the gates of death so that he may declare God's praise in Zion. This theme anticipates the greater deliverance accomplished through Christ, who triumphed over death and brought his people into the joy of salvation. The gates of death could not prevail against the purposes of God. The psalm continues by describing the nations falling into the pit they themselves made. Their own traps become the means of their destruction. Sin carries within itself the seeds of judgment. Those who oppose the Lord ultimately encounter the consequences of their rebellion. God's justice is not arbitrary. It reveals the righteousness of his rule. Verse 17 declares that the wicked and the nations that forget God shall be turned into Sheol. Forgetting God is not mere intellectual neglect, but covenant unfaithfulness and rebellion. In contrast, the needy are not forgotten forever. The hope of the afflicted rests securely in the Lord's faithfulness. The closing verses ask God to arise and judge the nations so that mankind may recognize its frailty. Human pride continually exalts itself against God, but divine judgment exposes the weakness of earthly power. The nations are reminded that they are merely men and not sovereign rulers over history. Psalm 9 ultimately points to the triumph of God's righteous kingdom. The Lord reigns forever, judges with equity, protects his people, and brings the proud low. The psalm calls believers to live in confidence and praise because God's victory is certain and his kingdom endures forever.